Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot. I just returned from interviewing Mark Richards, Captain Mark Richards of the Secret Space Program, or Space Command, at Vacaville Prison in California. And I just want to say that it was an excellent meeting. I was there with his wife, Joanne Richards, and I spent around 4 hours with him this time. We were allowed to have a pencil, which was a big victory, and paper. And so I not only brought a list of questions that came from me as well as you, the viewer, but I was also able to, to use the pencil, and in this case Joanne took notes while we were doing the interview, and so that was extremely helpful. So I will be able to publish, along with this video, a written transcript of the notes that we took, both of us actually. At this point, what I'm going to do is cover some general statements about Mark, his background, and then get on with the questions and answers that I used. And hopefully you'll find this very interesting. It has a great deal of information came through this time. So I guess, fasten your seatbelts, as they say. So to start out with, I just want to say that he's an extremely direct individual. He is obviously a military man. He worked in the Secret Space Program really since he was in his teens, as it happens, and he was trained to use firearms at the age of 3 years old to protect his mother while his father was away. His father was very well known and something of a star in the military, actually the Air Force. Mark spent time in England as a boy, and he interacted with Churchill and other well-known individuals on a high level of the sort of, you might say, the British monarchy and the Secret Space Program, as well as government. So because of those experiences, he was constantly meeting people who were extremely well known. People like Arthur C. Clarke and Pat Price, the well-known psychic, and so on. And there are people that, because he was a boy, that he's even forgotten that he'd met as a boy. So at this point, what I want to say also is that he is a man who can definitely handle himself in any situation. He has a lot of residual sort of power. He holds himself in check. Obviously, he's got a strong support structure in the prison, as well as through his contacts, mainly of those of which are the raptors, which are the raptors like velociraptors. I guess they look something like the Steven Spielberg velociraptors that you saw in Jurassic Park, although my understanding is they're very large. They're 8 feet tall, but they actually are crouched over, so they appear to be about 4 feet tall. They have tails, and they look something like dragons as well, the traditional understanding of a dragon. They consider both races of reptilians who they say want to take over this planet as their enemy. And because of that, they want to bond and work alongside with humans. And so that is what has forged a sort of bond over time with our race, even though in the early days they wanted to eat us. And one of the anecdotes that Mark tells is that when he was a boy, he was exposed to this race of beings, but that there had to be armed guards in the room, otherwise they would basically eat him. Although he does believe he has had, and he says this in the prior interview, he was basically abducted or contacted when he was a very young child by the raptors. So they obviously sort of chose him, singled him out for some kind of interaction, some karmic relationship, you might say, exists between him and the raptors. He also is aware of what he calls elementals, which are, I guess you might say, fairies and other kinds of beings that inhabit the multiverse of which we are part. So he has a relationship with that group, as well as in this interview I'm going to go through all the different races that he talks about and that the humans are interacting with at this time, mostly the military, from what I understand. So I've got a list of questions here. I was able to bring, as I said, a list of questions in. The questions are from the viewers and from myself, and as I go through them, I will be able to sort of give his answers, also because Joanne was taking very good notes, and I also have a quite a good recall of what was said. So, to begin, one of the things that I did was also ask him specific questions that had to do with past whistleblower testimony that Camelot has gotten. Also questions based on contactee information or information from authors that and other sources that we've gotten, just to test his information flow, to see what his understanding of those particular things are. And I got, in some cases, agreement, and in some cases an unequivocal no, and in some cases he simply didn't seem to know a lot about whatever it was. And in a 4-hour interview where I'm peppering him with questions in a prison situation where there are many people around, people with all kinds of loved ones visiting them, and the room is full of people, constant activity all around us. It's a very concentrated situation. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is why I meet him in person, because a lot of people wrote to me and mentioned, well, why don't you just write to him? And I want to say that I'm the only journalist that appears to have contacted him and done interviews for the 30 years that he's been incarcerated. And I'm not sure why that is. It is an interesting situation, to say the least. One thing is that his wife Joanne, in the early days, did some interviewing with him, and she has been publishing reports also that he writes while in prison and sends to her. And then she also compiles some of her own information that she's gotten from him into those reports. So those reports are available on her website, and I will make that available on the screen for people to click over to and purchase. Obviously, they need some form of income, so purchasing the reports can be very helpful, I imagine. I haven't read all the reports, but I plan to read them in the near future. Let's see. The other thing is that when he answers me, he seems to have no hesitation. He answers me, either with a yes and then explains in detail, or he says no and then explains why. He also, if he doesn't know something, he doesn't seem shy about admitting that. In some cases, he will say he will go research something and get back to me on it. So that also was happening. There was only one question in particular that he didn't want to answer. And that particular question was, I had gotten a sort of a download, you might say, to be sure and ask him whether or not he was currently going on missions. And the answer to that question of all questions was not forthcoming. Almost every other question I asked him, without fail, got an answer. But that particular one, he did give me a non-verbal answer in which he smiled and sort of nodded and indicated that yes, he is going on missions. In other words, out of body. We did talk about time travel. He talked about using your macabre or light body in order to do so. He says human beings are time travelers, and he seems very familiar with the concept. So this is something worth noting, and obviously if he's able to do this, this makes being in prison for 30 years much more livable, as you can appreciate. There is a reason why Vacaville Prison is supposed to be letting people who have been there on good behavior for many years, prisoners, out on parole at this time, and trying to empty out the prisons to make room in the prisons because they're overcrowded, and also to to make room for, I guess, future prisoners. It is a low security prison, so that is the sort of status he's in at the moment. Although it appears that he also has what you might call an extra layer of surveillance or control, because I was not able to obviously film him as I think other prisoners in the past who have been interviewed by, say, newspapers or even television. I think from time to time prisons do allow cameras and recording devices normally for a journalist. That was not the case, obviously, here. One thing that a lot of people ask is whether or not we're going to have disclosure anytime soon. And I think it's important for people to understand that Mark Richards is not someone who's waiting for disclosure. He, in his point of view, he is already sort of well-versed and has been since he was a young child, as a result of having this father who was called the Dutchman, who was a high-level Air Force officer, and he has since passed on. But they went on missions together ultimately when Mark was old enough, and he was extremely well trained throughout his youth, and so he was exposed to so many different races and so many different, I guess you might say, dimensions of reality, that he takes the multiverse absolutely for granted in his conversation. And he's always talking, he's talking about being a captain of a vessel, and that vessel is in some cases the Orion, what's called the Orion ship, which is built by the Americans, by the secret space program on the one hand, and was built starting in the 50s. And then he was also, I guess, captain of Minerva, which is a self-aware vessel that is an entity in her own right, and appears to be one of the only of her kind in our solar system, although she is in touch with other entities out there. So that she's a fascinating study, and it's talked about to some degree in the reports that Joanne puts out, but he did talk about Minerva in my questions here. So if you understand how he views the world, you'll understand why disclosure is rather beside the point from his point of view. Now, I have to say that the other side of that is that he has made an executive decision, possibly in part based on the 30 years of imprisonment that he's had to undergo, so that he feels that this is information that needs to get out to the public. He feels he is not violating his security oath. He is being very careful in what he puts out there. A lot of what he's putting out there through the question and answer sessions he says, is information that has been out there for a while, or if not out there, is rather dated. That sort of begs the question that what exactly is he revealing that is timely? And you're going to have to judge that for yourself. I have to say that the information he is going to give me and that you're going to hear here is pretty interesting information, and it is not out there in other forms for the most part. So he's quite unique as a whistleblower, and has a very sort of steady, I guess you might say, approach to the subject matter as well. He's not he doesn't crack a lot of jokes. I think he has a sense of humor, but his life is not full of humor necessarily, unless you see the absurdity in life, and I think he does. First of all, there are around 1,200 and 1,500 inmates. One of those inmates is a person who is basically, I think, to some degree, a political football, which all the inmates are. In this case, that is a person who actually committed the crime, at least one of the people who was caught and sentenced is serving time in Vacaville for the murder, the same murder that Mark is supposed to have committed. In his case, this other man's case, he was basically sentenced, and then he got another lawyer who is well paid on, and he got his sentencing overturned, and then applied for, I guess, parole or release, and they won't release him. So that's interesting in and of itself. It's not clear what is going on there, but it certainly tells you that there's something more than meets the eye in this case. As I've said, raptors are going to factor in a lot in this discussion. They apparently do have factions within the raptors who have played both sides throughout history. There is an empress who is now in charge of the raptors, who has looked down the timeline, and she has seen that the timeline in which the raptors align themselves with humans is the most successful timeline for their race. So this is why they have, at this time, made such a strong sort of agreement to work side by side with humans. The other one is that they find humans useful in combating the reptilian influence and control of Earth. They do consider the Earth their home as well. Now, there are another group of creatures that Mark will be talking about, and it's called the Trogs. And the Trogs are 7 to 9 foot tall. They are ant-like creatures who are also a combination of praying mantis, and very well known, I think, out in the sector. They are service to self, from what I hear, from what he says, sort of negatively oriented beings who work with the reptilian races. There is a very interesting syndrome that seems to go on that hasn't been talked about much out there, which are that there are several races who are not our friends who conduct what are called raiding parties to capture humans and then take them to their own planets. The raptors have been instrumental in rescuing large numbers of humans that have been taken in those raiding parties, and taking those humans to 2 moons, which are Mark would not let me know the name of or location of, because they're hiding it from these races that would simply go back and try to steal the humans back. Apparently humans are useful for many purposes, and so is the planet Earth. And I have a list here of the various purposes they may be used for. The most obvious is as a food source for the reptilians and greys. This is a well-known phenomena, and that humans are being used even on surface Earth, in underground bases, etc. In other words, fed to these beings or given to these beings for these uses. That's where Dulcie comes from, and so on. And Mark did lead, as part of my other interview, and I do want to say that anyone who is watching this interview should definitely go back and watch my first interview with Mark Richards. That was called Total Recall. It was on my site for a good 9 months. I interviewed him last November of 2013, and you should go back and watch that if you want to have a basis from which to understand what is being talked about in this interview. Another reason why humans are valuable is because they can be used as allies. In the case of, obviously, the raptors view us that way, and there are other races as well who find us valuable allies, in part because of I imagine, our building abilities, as well as as sort of an adversary for using weaponry and so on. So that's another thing. They do use humans as slaves on other planets, from what I understand, serving various races, building things, and so on. This may be the case in some underground bases as well. there may be something to do with what we know of as the human trafficking. Some of these people who are trafficked may in fact be used as slaves, not only for sex, but for other purposes. Another reason they use humans or are interested in humans is for scientific study. And then there is that Earth is a desirable vacation spot. That's often sort of ignored, but apparently factors in rather substantially. Another purpose that they want to interact with us for is for trading or bartering. There are merchant races out there. I'm going to be talking about one race in particular. It's a dog-like race called the Canonians, and they're a very interesting race. Another reason they may come to Earth is for access to minerals and precious stones. There seems to be a focus at this time on what are called colored diamonds, and they are going to be doing a lot of mining in Africa of these stones. They're not so valuable here on Earth, but they're highly valued by various races that visit Earth. And so I guess our government is going to, or our secret government is going to take advantage of that and do a lot of mining. Obviously they are interested in bases, having bases here. This is a good jumping off point for some races, going through this solar system, jumping to another solar system, going through vortexes or stargates, and so on. There is also, the last and most obvious one is that we are used as for breeding programs and genetic engineering programs. Human females are especially valued and used for this purpose, I'm told. So these are things that he was conveying. I think that there is more to that story, and I do want to investigate that further. I think he was being very careful in addressing that, and I'm kind of putting together this list out of all the length of the interview, and both the prior and the current ones that I've done with him, to sort of give a clear overview of what it leads to or what it means. Black star or dark star energy. Mark, last time I interviewed Mark, he talked about dark star or black star energy, and that is from a neutron star, recently exploded neutron star is one of the places it comes from, I think the major place it comes from. And in order to get it, we need the help of these various races who have already accessed this energy. Apparently this energy is not the same as 0-point energy, and what it does is put us in a whole different category with the interstellar races. It allows us to travel much further, and it seems to be quite extensive in what it allows us to do, the reach in the multiverse, in terms of our travel through the multiverse. And the jumping, it's used in jumping large distances and going through or past, for example, the galactic center, and so on. So from what I understand, the other races are not really happy that we have this technology. However, there are races that will barter with us and sell it to us in exchange for example, humans. And this is something that the secret space program has been doing, as a matter of fact. So obviously you might call that a weighing of priorities, and they decided to, on the dark side, exchange humans in exchange for this type of energy. So we do have access to it, and Mark says we are still having issues with going to get it and also navigating in order to get it. And so we use the help of these friendly races to do so, to navigate. He said one of the problems with navigating is that in order to gather the energy from a dark star, you need to jump back in time to when the neutron star exploded, not exactly when, but sometime after that, to where it's dispersed to a certain degree to where you can jump and not be burned by the star and not be basically demolished or brought into a gravitational pull by a star or a sun by jumping too close and not knowing where you're going to land. So we've been using friendly ET races to help us out in that manner. The other thing is that most of our science does not understand dark energy, even to this extent. And the fact that it could be made, for example, at CERN, but we would only be able to make a very small quantity, and it would be extremely expensive. So for that purpose, the way we snag it, as he called it, is with the help of the other ET races, going back in time, and basically snagging it through a gate. The other is to trade it by using the large number of humans, and the last is to barter, as we did with what are called the Canonians, the dog-like race of beings who are called a merchant race of the galaxy, or galaxies. And what they wanted from us was an underground base here on Earth as a jumping off point, and I guess a way station on the way out of this solar system and into other parts of the multiverse. And so they traded dark energy in exchange for that, for the underground base. They were given one in Australia, I'm told. And one of the things about their physicality is, from what I understand, they stand quite tall, but they're humanoid, so they're standing on their, on two legs. But what is significant is that they have faces like hound dogs, and they cover those faces when in contact with humans, and go out among humans wearing raincoats in appropriate weather, and they like to go out and shop among humans and so on. So this is something like what we heard about the tall whites, Charles Hall tall whites, which is quite interesting. Now, the Canonians apparently are friendly towards humans, as I'm saying, and they also consider Earth a safe place. They can't wait till disclosure happens, because they are looking forward to bartering and trading with humans. So that's quite interesting. There is also a cat-like race that he mentions, and I'll get into that a bit later. So there are various factions of our military in the secret space program, which is aligned with various interstellar races, and they are aligned in some cases with more than one race. The Raptors seem to be aligned with the Air Force and to some degree the Navy. Again, Mark was a Navy captain, but he was also apparently trained in both the Army and spent time affiliated with the Air Force. I have the feeling that what we're really looking at in terms of our military is not so much the different sort of types of military divisions, but whether those divisions are indeed made up of what we would call white hats, or which are not friendly to the reptilian races that want to take over the planet, or the black hats, which are friendly towards the reptilians and would be also known as the New World Order. So there are the militaries, at least as far as I understand it, and even based on my recent interview with Mark, it seemed clear that they divide themselves not so much in terms of the type of military they are, but in terms of their allegiances at this time. Okay, psychic abilities. Mark has amazing psychic abilities. He knows and I believe met Pat Price, who was a very well-known psychic. He was considered to be whereas Pat Price was the CIA equivalent of what Mark did in the Air Force, is what I'm told. Pat Price was getting ready to come forward in 1995 and 96 when he was murdered. And Mark did remote view him and said he has indeed died or passed on. Mark started working for Lockheed at the age of 16. He was tested for psychic and other abilities at that time, and he was found to not have the normal limitations of most children. There are several reasons for this. One of the reasons appears to have been his upbringing. The fact that he had a father who was very deeply involved in the secret space program, who trained him and taught him a lot about what he knows, as well as other contacts that he made growing up. And so this definitely widened his horizons, so to speak, and was very valuable to him once he started to become more activated in terms of his psychic abilities. I would also say perhaps his mother was instrumental in this way. It appears that she was extremely open-minded and allowed him to explore a great deal in many ways. I did ask him questions that I was asked, or that I asked, in order to get his take on various things that have been out there in the sort of alternative sector for a long time, so that I could find out what he thought about those various things. One of those is the so-called kill shot from the sun, and this is something that he said he believes is not going to happen, that it is a government program to put that information out there. For the most part, his point of view of the Earth and our timeline, or Mobius as he calls it, seems to be that we have a very sort of positive, might not be the right word, but that we are protected, that we are going to not have anything that will destroy Earth in the next many centuries to come. I also asked him about Ashiana Dean's early claim a number of years ago that the sun was going to implode at a certain point 200 years from now. He says that that is not true in his view, that the sun will continue on and is not threatened in that way. So again, to understand where he's coming from, first of all, he doesn't hesitate when he answers a question. He seems to feel that he knows the answer. And what I would urge everyone who listens to do is to simply do more research along these lines. We will ask him further questions as time goes on. As I said, the reason I met with him was manyfold, actually. I got a download telling me to meet in person with him so that he could get to know me and that trust could be established between us before I began to write to him and send him many questions. The other thing is that in receiving questions when he writes back, there's no guarantee that the letter will ever arrive to the person he sends it to. Because if the people who read his letters before they go out decide they don't want the information out there, they simply waylay the letter and it never arrives. So there is reason to meet with him in person, especially in light of sensitive topics. One might say that everything I'm asking him is sensitive, but it appears that there are some things that are more sensitive than others. And so as time goes on, now that I've met with him twice and gotten to know him a fair amount, and he me, I will probably be doing more written interviews with him in the future. And that will be very valuable, obviously, assuming things work in our favor. Okay, let's see, what else? It is also important to note that even if he does write answers, I have no absolute guarantee, other than sitting across from him, of what his body language is that accompanies the answer, of whether or not it is something written that is sent to me is actually the truth, or whether it is has been altered in the many ways of which they have to alter written documents, etc. So this is important to note. And he has had contact with people in the past where letters have gone missing, simply because they didn't want the information out there. One thing that came forward during my interview was that ETs are actually helping us keep this Earth intact, you might say, in the hologram, in the multiverse as you understand it. That they, both positive and negative ETs, have a vested interest in seeing the Earth continues in some form. And of course they differ in how, and and maybe even in the number of people that are left on the planet, but nonetheless in the fact of its existence. And so what this calls to mind is the idea that we are much more part of what you might call an ecosystem in the multiverse than we realize. That you can say, as above, so below, that ecosystems here on Earth could be understood in a larger sense, and that we are in essence protected in part because of larger species or more developed species who indeed protect us. And I guess the feeling is mutual, so that we also offer them protection or other benefits, let's say, in exchange for that protection. So it's that kind of a relationship, which is a different way of looking at it than simply thinking that you have a benefactor out there that's going to make everything all right. The way the universe seems to be structured is much more like what I would say is an ecosystem. He says that he doesn't believe that the New World agenda involves destroying Earth, that they wish that the sort of New World Order wants to maintain their wealth and power, that they sell to the middle class. There's a reason to believe that since they do, they're going to want to keep that flow going. He says that there are no, quote unquote, and I'm going to quote him exactly here, no fracture lines in our Mobius that would suggest world destruction. So that's valuable to know. I asked him about the pole shift concept, in spite of what he said, and his answer to that was interesting. He said that he didn't think it could happen, at least that it would not be man-made. He thinks that government groups and factions are trying to figure out how to stop that from happening as opposed to create it. Now, I'm not sure I agree with him, but he did talk about that would simply make, for a very bad day on Earth, if we did have a pole shift, that is a complete shift. And I understand that a lot of destruction would happen. I don't believe that even with a pole shift that you would be eliminating all of the human race. He does say that we have several races that do threaten us, so we do have enemies out there. Okay, black oil or goo. I asked him about this because I wanted to know if it was still a factor. I've done many interviews with people, including David Griffin, Miles Johnston, and other researchers about this subject, as well as gotten back-channel whistleblower information on it. It seems to be a major factor in the Gulf oil spill, and was eating the bottoms of boats, etc. Now, he says that this is still a factor to be dealt with, that it was or is a sort of artificial intelligence that was put on Earth a long time ago by, he believes, a more reptilian race. He says, however, that it's more like mushrooms or fungus. It can take over a human, but you're not going to have what he calls a conversation with it anytime soon. So it seems to be a problem. However, the technology, he says, is also held by other races. This sort of fungus-like substance, they have access to it. We are still fighting it, but the situation seems to have stabilized to some degree. Okay, he says that we have an off-planet group of what he calls peacekeepers and watchdogs that are willing to defend humans and Earth. Now, I get an impression that this group is made up of various ET races. He also says there's a confederation of races, such as the Ashtar Command, that they have been enemies at times, but they have also worked with us at other times, and that he has actually worked with them, and when the mission called for it, it appears. and they do occupy a base in the Death Valley area, which is significant. Mount Shasta. I asked him about Mount Shasta because I had been there to visit a couple of years ago, and I noticed that the forest and the whole area had a very bizarre frequency that didn't seem normal, and it actually had seemed sort of almost dead in a really sort of weird way. In other words, the trees are still there and they appear to be growing, but there's some kind of difference. And I was communicated with by the Telos people who are inside Shasta. And they let me know that the reptilians had taken over, and that is why the energetics had changed. And there was a great deal of sadness around this. So I wanted to ask Mark about his impression of that information, although I didn't tell him all of that. He basically said it's a Lemurian base. It's been there for 15 to 16,000 years. It's gone through several changes and challenges. And the Raptors were there in the mid-70s until around 81 or 82, and they pulled out after the Falklands War due to the angst from other races who felt they were not able to be trusted because they were too aligned with certain humans, what appears to be the Navy or the Air Force. And so this is an issue that the Raptors have to deal with. They are getting very positive relationships going with certain divisions of the military, and that is rubbing various, I guess, not so friendly factions the wrong way. So they have to contend with that, as far as I understand. Nazis in the U.S. government, he doesn't seem to believe that the U.S. government, at least surface government, is in control of the Nazis. I happen to disagree with that, but I think it's also, it was the way he put it. What he did say is that the Nazis are controlling the corporations are controlling the government, and therefore, in essence, the Nazis are controlling the government. However, he doesn't believe the Bushes are Nazis. He sees them as opportunists, that they are always interested in the monetary and strategic angle on things, and so that motivates them. He says they are fascists, however. The Nazis believe in a totalitarian government. They are in favor of human slavery, social purity, and they have gotten help from Aldebaran and the Reptoids, and possibly, and most probably, the Trogs. Again, the Trogs as a race are the part ant-like, part praying mantis type beings. Okay, regarding Africa, I asked him about Africa. He said they have big plans for Africa, and the way he put it was none of them good. He said there was something going on in Nigeria and the Congo. He did not deny that we sold large portions of Africa to an incoming race from Aldebaran. However, I need to get some clarification on that because he didn't seem to want to really go into any depth in that regard. And I've gotten quite a bit of information, as most people who know Camelot will know, partially from Gordon Duff and other whistleblowers, saying that indeed we have sold large portions of Africa to an incoming race from Aldebaran. That race looks like your traditional sort of Nazi/Nordic being. However, they are disguising themselves, one whistleblower is saying, by coloring their skin to be darker skinned, so they are actually matching the local population more so, and they are landing in hidden air bases in Africa, one of which is hidden in and around the Johannesburg area of South Africa, and that's something I've gotten several testimonies behind the scenes regarding, meaning testimonies about the hidden base, not testimonies about the Africans or Aldebaran, those from Aldebaran coming across the border, although I am told that there is an influx by a certain whistleblower. And Gordon Duff is also talking about this, and this is very much like the TV show The Event. And so that apparently was seeding the information into the media. There's a mining of colored diamonds, as I mentioned. Several alien species find colored diamonds, not the clear ones, but colored, to be very desirable at the present time. So they're going to be increasing the amount of mining in Africa for those colored diamonds. He did talk about a cat-like race of beings, and he said they are panther type. They introduced the concept of the cat goddess to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and that they are the ones who probably built the Sphinx and so on. He didn't talk much more about them at all, so it'd be great to get more information on that. Vesta is an asteroid. There is a base in the asteroid with human and Nordic species. Orion ships. There are two types of Orion ships. There are the humanoid, human-built Orion ships that the humans built in the 1950s and have been upgraded since then. And one of those Orion ships was Mark Richards was captain of. We have, I think they said there was something like 12 of those vessels. However, and they can go interstellar and jump and so on. Now there are also other Orion ships that actually Dan Burish referred to, being positioned around the globe. And as far as we know, he was referring to Orion ships that were manned by Nordics, coming from the constellation of Orion. So there may also be Orion ships piloted by Greys, for example. But ours is considered to be what you call a deep space fleet. Yes, my notes are saying there's 12 that were built in the 50s. We have an exchange program. They called it an interchange program with aliens to learn about space travel and navigation. I asked him a couple questions that we've gotten information with regarding Solar Warden and our ability to supposedly look at a craft that's coming into our solar system and be able to tell where the craft is from, the beings that are on board, and that sort of thing. And I was told that yes, we can do that. That, however, from Mark's point of view, we are not as far along that line as we need to be. The idea being, he said that if they're incoming at a rapid rate, we have to be able to do that very rapidly. And he says he's not so sure that our technology is as up to speed as it should be. There's another side of that is Minerva, who again is a biological entity, a spaceship. She is one of a kind in our solar system. She's in touch with others of her kind out there. However, she is basically the only one in, I guess, our solar system, possibly even our galaxy. She is 40,000 years more advanced than our technology. She considers humans irritants, kind of like fleas. However, she did interface with Mark Richards, and he was able to fly her. And so he had a special configuration of his brain that would interface with her onboard technology, I guess. And maybe there was a sort of a mind meld. But again, this is something I need to get more information on. Some people wanted to know why he doesn't just leave prison if he's able to do so. However he would do it, time traveling or ET assistance. And he said he has several offers on the table, including those from the Raptors, to go to other planets, etc. He doesn't want to leave his friends and families here on Earth, however. Friends and family. He has an extended, rather large family, from what I understand, some of whom are actually living in Britain. He said that, yes, they could break him out of prison any time. If he was broken out, he would have to leave the planet because he would be hunted by his enemies, who are reptilians and some humans. He does have protection and is, as I said, very able to protect himself. He loves this planet, says it's the best Earth-like planet out of 1,700 others that have human life. Okay, so Another subject is terraforming the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. I was told that we were doing so. He says no, but we do have bases there. He said we have terraformed a couple moons that contain large numbers of humans, hundreds of thousands of humans as it happens, that were rescued from raiding parties by the raptors. And they are not able to bring them back here because he knows, or they know, that at least some of the humans would talk. And they can't have that. So there are at least 2 moons, and they are, I'm told, outside our solar system, possibly even our galaxy, and that they will not reveal the whereabouts of those moons because obviously the negative service to self group would go and steal back the humans again. Our terraforming attempts have been less than successful, he says, because it's hard to get the earth plants and to take root, and the bacteria to grow on alien soil. So that's been something of a problem for us. Mars, regarding Mars, he said everything is underground. He didn't talk a lot about Mars, and I think that we need to go down that road. So hopefully we can do that more in the future. Regarding the raptors, just to clarify, again in terms of their size, he says they're 4 foot tall, hunched over on very large legs and thighs. Stretched out, they would be 8 foot tall. They look something like the Jurassic Park Spielberg raptors. Anything they do to help humans can be used against them by reptoids and trogs, I was told. And again, the raptors have an empress who has looked at the Mobius of future timelines and seen that the ones in which they align themselves with humans are the most positive for their race. So that now they are dedicated to helping humans and not eating them. However, in the past there have been battles even between humans and raptors, and the Battle of China Gate is one such battle in which some of the raptors, we were actually fighting them, along with these crystalline beings that I am going to describe shortly, as well as others. This took place in China and in a stargate above China, from what I understand, and it has been written about in one of Mark's reports, again, that Joanne, his wife, has been publishing. So in the China Gate War, there was a group of raptors that disagreed with the Empress and worked with the Nazis' reptoids against the humans. So, and that was back in 1954, at which time a treaty was established between the raptors and the humans. There are crystalline beings. They are blob-like in structure. This actually relates to an interview Camelot did quite a long time ago with 2 guys from New York, and I have to look up their names to get their names right, but they had disclosed this information about these crystalline blob-like beings. And they are actually a race of beings called the Jotuns, and they are the spies of the multiverse. They can shapeshift into a human or a couch or a chair or whatever is close to their size. Apparently they can't shapeshift too much larger than they already are, but they are indistinguishable from the real thing when they do so. And they are used by many different races as spies on the humans here on our planet, and they are not friendly to humans. And the Battle of China Gate was also involved them. New Berlin is an established base in Antarctica, and it was built and run by the Nazis. There are raptors and humans there now, as well as blue-grays, which is a race that is friendly to the humans, and I've heard about this blue-gray race in the past. There are various people that are in touch with them and have been contactees talking about them. And there are also small groups of ambassadors from other races at the New Berlin site. Mark admits to working with some of the Nazis, from what I understand, when necessary to his mission that are located in that base. Okay, regarding the Rothschilds, Mark has a problem with most of the Rothschilds, he says, but does not believe they're necessarily Satanists. He says at least one Rothschild is a good person. And he also said again that that Bechtel is a corporation that, or a family that is a much more, much darker, he put it, than the Rothschilds. And they are running, I guess, behind the scenes, a part of the secret space program. Let me say, the secret space program, I asked him who's running it. He said it was run by the United States and Russia, with Great Britain and France also playing a big role, is how he put it. He says we can trace human DNA all the way back, much farther than what is commonly known. He said the Pleiadians, I asked him about the Pleiadians, he said that they're not really around much now, and that they contributed DNA to the human genome. They were the first humans, is how he put it, but they have left and not contributed anything to help our DNA progress lately. And he said he's actually disappointed in that for some reason. Okay, the chemtrails. Yes, he said they're being used to poison humans, to terraform the planet. They contain nano and are working to create a humanity, what you may say is 2.0 or 3.0. They're looking to create a more suggestible, docile, controllable race that is also super soldier capable. So they want both things in one being. And that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. He also told me, he wrote a letter, which is going to be posted along with this video, that clarifies that he has more to say on this subject, and will probably be doing so in upcoming letters that he sends me. I have gotten permission to print all of his letters, post them online. Some parts of the treaties with aliens over the years have given away our rights, he did say. I asked him about autism being created as a result of parents who were exposed to radiation on purpose by the secret government in order to create precogs. He does not agree that that's the case. However, I have to say that I've seen multiple pieces of information to this effect, and on a psychic level, I have to disagree on that. He says that there is a lowered standard of excellence in the military as a result of a lot of the programs that they've been instituting over the years, and that it's a shame. He also talks about, of course, there being various factions in the military, and this is crucial. It's very important to understand that not just our agencies, which would be the CIA, NSA, or other agencies, are factionalized, but we have factionalization going on among different branches of the military, so that the Navy will not agree with other parts of the Navy, Navy Intel, the NRO, versus various factions of the Army, for example, and so on. Time travel. He travels without a Stargate or a wormhole, and says humans basically can time travel using their Merkaba, light, body, and motion. And it is clear to me that he does go on missions again using his light body, and is very familiar with time travel. Again, just to repeat here, the only question he would not answer, however, was in regard to that. So he is not admitting, at least in person, that he is actually doing this. this was picked up more by his body language, in which he was, in essence, trying to convey that information to me non-verbally. He says, I asked him about parallel Earth. He basically said it's a dangerous place to go, that if you encounter your doppelganger, as they call them, or double, you should not touch them. And he said, I asked him about this time travel story, which I revealed from a witness who came forward to me off camera. And that's all revealed in my time travel conference, and I urge you to watch that segment. Each little segment is available to stream online for $5 at this time, and this was done over a year ago, and also as a DVD. The DVDs cost more than $5, but they are definitely collector's items. This was a stellar conference, and the money does go to finance my work and make things travel to meet witnesses as well as to do speaking events possible. He said that regarding time travel, the Nazis have made great strides. They've done reverse aging, as this witness did convey to me, and he verified that. He said that basically thousands of Nazi officers and scientists have been reduced aged. They are, he said they're working in the secret space program. He said the best place for them to hide is actually Nazi Germany, the best place to hide for them is Germany, and they're hiding in plain sight. As my witness told me, they may have some low-level job, but and they will appear to be quite young, and they're actually working at in the secret space program behind the scenes. Since 1982, it is easier for them to reduce age and put them back into society. Now, I'm not sure what 1982 has to do with anything, but that year did come up, so there's something going on there. I will perhaps try to get further clarification. I can tell you that he agreed, in fact, he verified that Werner von Braun and Disney were among the first to be cloned, and that there is an avatar scenario that is easy to achieve using your own DNA, and the mind, he said, is based on DNA, and I think that's something scientists aren't quite up to speed on. But he was very clear in stating that. Okay, so the Earth, he said it's a big vacation spot, observation spot for visiting species. He said they may sometimes fear us, which is something we don't realize, and that there's a big, if you will, alien tourist industry. Okay, regarding portals, stargates, my beingness of, the beingness, in essence, of other planets, or planetary beings, you might call them. For example, Saturn and Jupiter have large portals into other dimensions. He said they are gas giants, but they are also viewed by other ET races as beings in their own right, as I believe Earth is, and he did verify that. We know of Earth in that sense as Gaia. I'm not sure what they actually call her. He says that there is a gaseous creature that visits us, that comes from other planets, and that gaseous creature is rather sort of oval in shape, and it looks like a cloud. It can, come into a room and leave a room and so on. It can survive here. He says that anything that develops a multi-genetic code is alive. There is no ruling body that rules Earth from Saturn. Now, the reason that came up was I asked him, because there's a huge cult, or a Saturnian cult, on the dark side that seems to be thinking or believing or worshiping some kind of individuals who control Earth, or that's how they term it, or seem to believe it. It's also said that Saturn is in charge of time, which is kind of a bizarre connection. And I'm not sure why that is. I don't know why we have a cult like that here on Earth. But basically, he did not seem to be aware of a group that's controlling Earth from Saturn, he said. So Saturn herself is a being. She is worshipped and revered by several ET races. Back in 61 and 71, we had interplanetary meetings that his father organized. And he said that at that time, humans did not understand what being alive really is. And so that when the aliens would get together to have a meeting, they would look around and they would say, but Saturn isn't here, and the humans would think that they meant beings from Saturn, and they would say, well, we're not in touch with any beings from Saturn, and the ETs would say, no, Saturn herself needs to be here. So there was a disconnect at that point, and humans have since then come to realize that planets actually do have a presence and a beingness. And they would actually refuse to meet, and they also see Jupiter in a similar way, it seems. I asked him about this phrase from Arthur C. Clarke called "all worlds are yours except for Europa," which has always stuck in my mind. And he said that the reason Europa is off limits is that it's actually being reserved for a race of beings that are sort of worm-like, and that they wish to develop there, and that we do have a number of installations. In fact, many races have installations on Europa. There are 16 robotic bases there. And I have to say that I remote viewed Europa and did see something of this nature. Okay, we have been attacked by advanced AI species, robots, androids, and more. So that's sort of a loaded statement. I don't have a lot more behind that, so I would need to get more information on that score. I asked him about gold and how gold is prized in the multiverse. He said he did acknowledge that the gold found on Earth is of a different energetics than what you find in asteroids, etc., off planet. One of the things that is different is that it doesn't have the same pollution levels as Earth gold, nor the same long-term pressure. It is used in space travel as a locator, what he called a directional locator. He does not know about the interdimensional qualities, but acknowledges that it is possible. I have been told by whistleblowers about the interdimensional qualities of gold, and that may contribute to why they do chemtrails using gold. It's said to be an experiment in part conducted by CERN to allow the Earth herself to go interdimensional, and that relates to the Wingmakers material, of which is published an interview with James, who is the creator of the Wingmakers material, on my site, and I encourage you to look at wingmakers.com for more information about the sort of time-jumping quality of what they wanted to do with Earth, which was called blank slate technology, and his story to do with Neruda and the Neruda interviews. We could slide Earth slightly off kilter to avoid certain incoming races, for example, and move ourselves interdimensionally, it sounded like. However, it's very dangerous. So that, I think, is a reference again to blank slate technology. One of the questions was about why he talks, and he has made an executive decision that he feels that people need to hear a lot of this information. He's also, I think it's also payback for being in the situation he's in. He does feel that there's plausible deniability, first of all because he's up on murder charges in spite of the fact that he is innocent, and secondly because I'm sure in terms of Camelot, we are considered to be quite fringe, and that lots of people might discount this information coming from him as a result. regarding war in the Middle East, which I asked him about current sort of heating up of war in the Middle East. He said that that there is guarding of the stargates with the Raptors' help, that there are numerous gates along in between on the mountains between Iraq and Iran, and that they float up and down, and they are constantly shifting, which makes guarding them all the more difficult. So that is partially why we continually want to be over there, and I think there's a lot more to the story in terms of what's going on in the Middle East. He did say that Iran, the imams, are aligning themselves with the reptilian species, perhaps mistakenly. And this is part of why the Muslims we are constantly at war with the Muslims culture at this time, or at least one reason, supposedly. Again, this is a topic that needs more exploration. Let's see. So in terms of wars and politics on Earth, there is an interstellar race involvement in what's going on here on this planet. There is evidence on the planet of alien visitation, some buried evidence of ET, that have been built by the ETs that have been buried in places like the Gobi Desert and in Malta. His reaction to my questions about Malta were stunning. As it happens, he was planning to write a book on Malta, and he verified a great deal of what I had intuitively and also gotten in terms of download for the purpose that I'm organizing a tour of speakers to go to Malta, and he did verify that there are secrets hidden there by the Vatican and the Knights of Malta. And there's more about that, so I'll get into that in just a moment. He said there's a carved mural near Persepolis that involves ET races. He said in Iran, we've been battling them since 1979. Up until then, it was fine, but since then, he believes they're taken over by the jinn and reptoids. He says, let's see, certain races of oceanics are advising our military, and the Raptors are closest to the U.S. Air Force. When he said oceanics, I think he means the races in the Pacific Ocean. So that's interesting. He says also that the part of the antipathy between the U.S. and the Russians is a result of the Russians aligning themselves with the reptoids. He also said that there are built-in animosity between the U.S. and the Russians, in part because of the different sort of human conditions that the Russians have had a much more strenuous exposure to the elements, etc. And because of that, they are much crueler in nature. And this sort of lifestyle difference contributes to our differences. In regard to the sort of political scene out there today in the world, he said the Chinese are aligned with a race of hairy humanoids who I got the impression are not what we know of as Bigfoot, from what I understand. However, they've had, I think, a long-standing relationship with this race, and also the Zetas. And the Zetas and the Chinese have a very long-established relationship. So I think that that's very important in knowing the role that China is now playing on the world stage. He said that there are of 3 other races that are interacting with the Chinese, but he does not know of any new races or technology that the Chinese have been given. However, I have a whistleblower who does say there is one new race that the Chinese are dealing with who have given them access to a special technology. And Mark did not seem to know about that. And I have to say, just to clarify that, just because he says he doesn't know about something or whatever, some of which he is probably going to research, but other than that, I think he's also trying to be careful in terms of what he can reveal and what he can't, because in his recent letter to me, he did say he needed to check on some things that he released in this interview, in fact. to make sure that it was okay to have released them. I think that, again, when I'm in person, there's a dynamic that is established, and people do talk often quite freely. So it's very valuable if you're looking for the truth. He said there are new Russian bases in the Ural Mountains that are affecting the U.S.-Russian relations. That's how he put it. Putin wanted Crimea for various reasons, and one of the reasons pertains to a very bizarre magnetic anomaly in the area of Crimea, where tanks and whole battalions of troops simply disappear into thin air. It's kind of like a Bermuda Triangle of the ground in Crimea. And I believe that there have been at least 9 pyramids found along the coast of Crimea. They may be contributing to this bizarre effect. And he didn't seem to know much else about it. But I do believe it contributes to why the U.S. and Russia are very interested suddenly in Crimea. There are some more practical reasons why Ukraine and Crimea are strategic jumping off points that have to do with a war, for example, with Iran, gas pipelines, and so on. However, I would say that this particular anomalous goings-on has more, and ancient technology that also has been possibly unearthed in Crimea would be more to the point. It's very likely that also indicates that there's a stargate or a major vortex in Crimea, wormhole or whatever. He said that Putin is not the good guy that he pretends to be on the world stage necessarily, but that he knows a great deal and that he's very intelligent, and that our leaders are surface leaders like Obama and crew. A lot of them are simply not read in as well as Putin is, and this makes our leaders appear to be possibly much dumber than they are, simply because they just aren't read in on to the degree that Putin is. He basically said Putin knows pretty much everything. Let's see. In terms of Malta, he said some of the ruins on Malta are not from this planet. He said that the temples, a few of the temples, have been built by other races, including the Raptors. He said that the vortexes there are controlled by the Vatican and Knights of Malta. He said that it is one of the powerhouses energetically on Earth, and there are others. He's thinking of writing a book on Malta, and he loves it, but a good friend of his was killed on Malta, and that person was quite powerful, and so I think he sort of has tried to distance himself from Malta. But it was really fascinating to see that my intuition also coincides with his knowledge, and he did give me quite a bit of information about Malta. He said that Imnidra is a temple that is built by the Raptors, and I had always talked about the fact that the doorways at Imnidra and also the upper temple are, which name is escaping me at this exact moment, are low, and therefore, even though they have found longheads, evidence of longheads or Anunnaki there, it appears that those particular temples were built by the Raptors, and that he verified that. He said that the very wide door was also built to allow for their tail, and that they were about 4 feet tall, etc. He also talked about Gajantia, which is this huge structure on Gozo, was a galactic space center. It was a central place where races from the multiverse would come and have meetings, etc. It's a sort of spaceport, he said, like Zeptepi in southern Turkey, and that it is a big alien tourist spot, or was, back in the day. He said that there are many secrets being kept hidden in Malta, and that the Knights of Malta are serving the Vatican to keep those secrets hidden. Some of those secrets do pertain to Atlantis, just as I have thought. Now, regarding Atlantis, he also said, as I have indicated, that Malta is considered a safe haven, but it is not, in his view, the center of Atlantis. That it was that Atlantis, actually, according to the Pleiadians, he said, was the North American continent, which at one time was much closer to Portugal and Spain, and this is when the Earth was smaller and the continents eventually moved apart. He said at one time it was around 1,000 miles off of Portugal, and that I told him about the oil drilling in Malta that will be interfering with the plates where the plates, these huge geomagnetic plates, intersect, and that will cause an instability in the area that's in the central Mediterranean, and that did cause earthquakes and volcanic action in the past. And he said, indeed, that will destabilize, and it's crazy to be doing that. And it's interesting because I was told by a secret witness on Malta, that they had held off drilling oil from Malta during the time when Gaddafi was in power, because Gaddafi asked them to. I guess he wanted to keep the oil prices high, the oil that came from Libya, and that's changed now that Gaddafi has died. I asked him about the John Lear Tower on the Moon that some people had asked. One person wanted to know about reincarnation and the so-called Tower on the Moon for souls, and he is not aware of that. He said there are many towers of the moon, but they have nothing to do with reincarnation. So, for what it's worth. And I should say here that in terms of what Mark knows and what he doesn't know, he does not hesitate. So he appears to believe he has the answers to almost everything I ask him unequivocally. And as I've said, he's not shy about stating his opinion. And he does state it very sort of no nonsense, forcefully, however you want to call it. However, there's no reason to assume that he does, in fact, know everything, especially when it comes to spiritual matters. So if you wish to do further investigation in this and your intuition tells you differently, then it's possible there are other explanations that Mark has not considered. In other words, he is a military person. He was fully read in, apparently, with what our secret government does know and is learning from ETs as well. However, I suppose that's no complete guarantee in terms of spiritual knowledge. So just a caveat in that regard. The Bush branch of the New World Order was sort of running the lead up until 2008, when they were forced to pull back because of what they called mismanagement. And that obviously coincides with the housing cabal, the scandal and crisis. So the mortgage, the whole thing that Catherine Austin Fitz was talking about in my interview with her. If you haven't seen that interview, I encourage you to do so. Let's see, regarding the United Nations, Mark is a deep believer in the dream of the UN. He says that there are at least 2 meeting places on Earth today for interstellar races to meet. One is in Britain and one is in Chile, southern Chile. The one in southern Chile is often attacked by earthquake weapons from the reptilians. And the one in the UK used to be in a well-known castle, and he said it was a major meeting place of all the races. He says that has now changed to a Space Command Center in Leicester, or Leicester, and there's more information on the letter that I'm going to be printing along with this interview in that regard, because he followed it up with a quick letter to explain where these places are. He said the one in the Space Command Center today, which is located in a park with a forest around it, he said there is not used as much for meetings of visiting races, but there's a lot more going on there than the public realizes. He also said that the United States would not allow all the different races to come and meet there. However, Britain had a different point of view and does allow that to happen on their soil. He did talk to me about his state of mind and how he survives prison. Apparently his relationship with what he calls the elementals on the one hand and the raptors have a lot to do with keeping him in good spirits. He also apparently is part of a network where he gets up-to-date information. And I mentioned that he even referred to a being that is part in a movie. It's depicted in a current movie called Earth to Echo. And that little being that gathers things around it that are mechanical, he said that's not its real body, but that when it comes to this planet, it grabs anything it can find that's metallic in order to create a sort of body-like structure in order to deal with this dimension. And that's actually a very good small movie, even though it's a major motion picture, and I think that people should watch it if you get a chance. Okay, regarding the Rings of Saturn, I asked him about the Norm Bergram book, Rings of Saturn, and the craft that Norm says, are creating the Rings of Saturn. He didn't talk much about the ships in the Rings of Saturn, or didn't seem to know a whole lot about them. He talked about the attacks on the spaceport that is located in Chile, southern Chile, and says it's being hit by earthquake weapons from the reptoids on a regular basis, and you will probably be able to be aware of that simply by watching all the earthquakes that happen in that area. He did say, however, there is a group of peacekeepers and watch people. Let's see, he called them a watch force or peacekeepers in our galaxy that are protecting that base, that spaceport, as well as the one here in Britain. That there is nothing that is threatening our Earth on this Mobius timeline. And he said that the religions do work very hard to build up a scenario of an apocalypse and that sort of nonsense, as he calls it. He had a very interesting segment in which he talked about ETs that are financing major motion pictures. He actually said that the money from the mortgage scandal, the whole housing sort of structure of that funnel of money that's going into black projects that Catherine Austin Fitts talks about is a relatively small amount. He says a great deal more money is coming from movies, and that both James Cameron and George Lucas are fully read in on the ET presence and our interactions with them, at least to some degree, and that they are aware that their movies are being financed in part by the Raptors in many cases, and that there's also a clear paper trail that is hidden in Hollywood that would prove that this money made from those movies is basically going, what you might say, underground, off-planet, into black projects and the secret space program. He said there's going to be more movies coming out about dragons in the near future because the Raptors are using them as PR vehicles to improve their image with humans now that they're trying to align themselves with us. It is clear that humans are viewed to some degree in this in arrangements with various races as a commodity, and there are there are new treaties, he said, that have established a certain degree of protection for humans. However, I think that this area where humans are being utilized for various purposes by various races is something that he was being quite careful with regard to talking about. And I think that it is an area that obviously needs a lot more explanation and investigation. So I think that covers almost everything we talked about, and I'm just going to go back over all of my notes and make sure that I've covered everything. If there's anything, I will add to this video when it comes up. But that was the total amount of information that I received from him this time around. As mentioned, I expect to continue a written correspondence with him as often as possible, and try to send him questions. So if you have more questions you'd like to ask Mark, feel free to send them to me, and I will also go in and see him on occasion when it becomes necessary, in order to make sure that we have a clear through line of communication that is not interfered with. So thank you very much for listening, and I appreciate all the support that Camelot has gotten over the years. It's a fascinating, brave new world that we're part of. I think this information can help to augment your understanding of what's really going on here on the planet. I think it would be a great thing if Mark Richards was released, if he could go onto the circuit and begin sharing his knowledge. And I think that there must be some degree of disclosure, if you will, being allowed on his part through him, with a great degree of what you call plausible deniability, which is allowing this information to come through at this time. So thank you very much.